So you're saying that suffering is not required in life because you don't have to suffer to be good. But in certain cases, that I think that suffer is good. Like for example, you are suffering for a certain purpose. How do you think about that?
Okay, so I'm gonna answer it by rephrasing the way you said it. Right? Is force, is the initiation of force, right, or like just force in general, required for like freedom, right? So like, did we had to go to war so that to get the Constitution, right? We had to go to war with fucking England to get the fucking Constitution in America to today how it is because of that, right? We went to war. Do you think that that's the same thing or no? Because we had to go to war. We initiated force. You can make the argument that we were defensive, but
Well,
regardless, we
it would be right because if we're not under like
Tyranny.
the English rule, right? Cause so how do we know what's gonna be good for us?
So okay. So how about this? I'm gonna reward it again. So if America existed without being owned by the British, would there ever been America that we know today, or did there have to be an enemy? Did there have to be this war to do it?
I think through the war, the
So you think that only through the war that these ideas happened, like Constitution and Thomas Jefferson, all those people?
no, because it's more like because before like what happened before the war happened, then people knows what's good for them and why they fight for it.
Do you see what I'm doing with your question? I'm trying to
You're
show
checking
you
my
an example.
assumptions.
I'm trying to show you an example of like like an ideal example, almost in history. In history, that was exactly like it was like almost like a novel, right? Like it's so perfect because it was like two evil people going against, not two people, but like one evil dude and one good guy going against each other. The best idea wins, right? But what I'm saying is, was it required for America and the American philosophy, the Constitution, right, to be created? Did there have to be an aggressor? Like the French Revolution wouldn't have happened if the kings weren't as fucking retarded as they were, right? Like they weren't crazy with power, right? Obviously, there wouldn't have been a revolution.
Well, there would not be a revolution if something doesn't happen, right? Like, this should always be something triggered.
The solution is there. I want you to see if you can figure it out. So apply that to America, right?
What's my assumption right now?
Uh-huh. Was it required, right? Like, what was the force required? I'm equating force to suffering because I think it's the same, right? Like in your example when you said, should I suffer to get like at a shitty job to save money to go to another country to get like a better job or some shit like that, right? Like that's a good example of suffering for something better.
But you're not, right?
But I'm trying to show you that your assumption is wrong about.
Okay, let's break down to the very last example, right? Because you're saving up money, you're suffering, you're saving up money to go to a better country, and then you are not actually 100% gonna live a better life, right? Because you would choose to suffer again? Suffer? Wait, sorry. Let's do it again, shall we?
Okay, so do you think that I think your general argument is you think that suffering is required sometimes, right?
Yes,
Because
sometimes not like...
I don't think you actually believe that like everyone has to suffer.
No.
You're saying that suffering is good sometimes, but not all the time.
Yes. Like suffer for a purpose is always
Okay, that's
good,
different.
right?
That's
Yeah,
different.
right.
That's different what I just said. You're saying suffering for a purpose
Yes.
is good.
Suffer for a purpose.
Okay, so then everyone should suffer.
No. Like why would they suffer
So then you're going
with
back
no
to
purpose?
So you're changing your
Question?
premises. You're changing the premise of suffering is sometimes good to suffering is good for a purpose. Which one is it?
Suffer for a purpose is good.
Okay, so suffering for a purpose is good, is like the French Revolution, right? No, sorry, it's like America, right?
Yeah.
Suffering is good sometimes is like the French Revolution.
For
I know you probably don't know like the history, but like I'm making that example for the recording, right? I'm trying to show you that you're operating under two different premises.
They should do it again.
No, keep going.
So what's the thing you said?
I'm trying to get you to understand. I'm trying to get you to ask me the question you want to ask me, because I feel like you don't know exactly what you're asking me.
So I'm asking you.
Because you're asking me two different things.
Purpose is good. I know.
That's the one you want to answer.
Yes.
Okay.
I want an answer for that.
Suffering
Like,
for
I
a
know that
purpose.
suffer is bad. Like, why would it be like anyone
No, but
would suffer?
The two things I said is you said suffering is good sometimes, and suffering for a purpose is good. Those are the two things that you thought were the same. That's what I was trying to get you to check your assumption to show so you could see the error.
No, suffer for nothing is always wrong. So suffer
Well,
sometimes is like not good, right? Like, cause like what is the point of like suffering if it's not for anything? Like you should always do something for something, right?
Like for example, the truth exists regardless of what happened, right? Like the American Constitution was true and it was good regardless of the action. So like someone could have just written it and it still would have been good. The actions coming to it are like, for example, like there's a truth. So true objective truth depends on the context. For example, if you tell me what day, what time is it, right? And then I tell you it's 1 a.m. or something, right? And if you tell me that tomorrow at 4 p.m., the same answer I gave you isn't true in that question. So then someone, a relativist, right, could make the argument, see, there is no such thing as truth. Or he would say, you can sometimes suffer, right? This is like, I'm trying to show you the logic connection, right? What I'm saying, or what's called the justificationism, would say that we're trying to find out the real truth. We're trying to find out what time is it all the time. What is just the time all the time? It is impossible. You can't find it, right? Because there's never a right answer for every context. So the answer for if I suffered to, and then that made me straighten up and made me stronger so that I could, work harder at my place and get a job, that was true at the time in that context. That doesn't make it true as a principle, right? You cannot base experiences on philosophical truths or philosophical principles. The reason I use the example of the French Revolution and American independence is because the Constitution was based on actual philosophical principles that were true no matter what. Even in the thing it says the inalienable rights, right? And the French Revolution was based on emotion. The French Revolution was bad. It ended up everyone was just dying, everyone was just dead, right? People like to think that the French Revolution was like heroic and it was cool, but it wasn't. It was actually really bloody and everyone just died. It was really bad. Because that was based on a reaction to suffering, rather than taking the context of what happened when you suffered and apply it to a truth, right? If you tell me that the time of the day, right, and then you ask me the next day, there's a true answer for every context. If I say, are you hungry, right, there is a truth to that. Either you are or you're not. If I say, what's the best political system? Oh, what's the best economic system? I say capitalism. I could be wrong. There could be a better one later. But right now, that's the best explanation, right? There is truth in that. For example, you say, if you say, well, there is no such, justificationists, right, would say, there's no such thing as truth because if it's always changing, then how will we ever know, right? But us knowing that we're wrong, we could be wrong, is a truth in itself. Does that make sense? That's how you can prove that suffering is bad. I'm also applying epistemology to it, just to show you, like, because I think that you're operating under that false epistemology. That's why that question sounds like it could be true to you. Like, the better epistemology you have, the less these kind of questions will happen. Remember how I told you there's no such thing as a contradiction, right? If you check your premises, you'll find that one of them is wrong, and then everything will make sense again. I feel like this is an example of you had a false premise, and that's why you thought that you had a disagreement with me. Not necessarily with me, but with the philosophy, right? That's usually what our disagreements always come down to.
I didn't understand that. because that was like too complicated, right?
Yeah.
You should have said that if people find out that suffer is not necessary, there'll be no war happen.
Okay, let me
So
see.
the constitutions would be happen before the war.
Okay, so let me say exactly what I just said again. Right, in the simplified version. Okay, so the reason I told you about the difference between the French and the American Revolution is I was trying to get you to find out the question you were asking, which was is suffering good sometimes, sometimes good, sometimes bad, or is it suffering for a purpose is good? And then then now when we find out the question you were asking, which was the latter, right? I used the example of time being like truth contextually, right? As in the same thing as Americans suffering for the Constitution as being true in that situation, and that the French it was based on emotion, right? Like that's something I said earlier, so it's true. This is why I said about suffering being not necessary.
Okay. But did you think that
Like suffering was involved in the American Constitution, and it was good for that truth. That was the context I was good. That's what I was saying.
the war was the trigger for the Constitution, right?
Yeah.
So,
oh yeah, and then I forgot to say. So like, if you could just go back in time, right,
Mhm.
to 1700, and just write the Constitution because it's true. Those are the right ideas. You don't actually need to go to war for the ideas to mean more or anything like that.
But so what if suffering is good because
Like,
like
you're
what
using
if
the
right
ends to justify the means.
Yeah, I mean, just think about this right now, okay? Let's say the people nowadays living in the 1700, right?
Uh-huh.
Like before the war, they were so lazy. They wouldn't do anything, right? So what the English would do to America would trigger them to start something. You know what I'm saying? Like it's like a trigger for something to start. It's kind of like how a Big Bang in the human.
Yeah, it's kind of like the argument people say that NASA, like, we wouldn't have invented all that stuff unless we were in a race with Soviet Union to go to the moon.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
It's
Like
kinda
if there wasn't that
right?
pressure, but I feel like because those scientists got funding, and they actually could do things because they were put in an accelerated funding path, right? That's why that's what happened. Like the consequences of that. I don't think it was necessarily the race to beat Russia.
Okay.
Like the suffering of going to the Cold War wasn't required to create memory foam, right? 'Cause,
Okay,
you
how
know,
about this? What if I say that suffering is the trigger for evolution? Like for example, if Samsung doesn't exist, Apple would still be like
Okay.
iPhone 5
Okay.
right now.
Okay,
It's not iPhone X Max or something like that. Right?
what you're talking about is competition. Is different than suffering.
I mean, if
Okay.
Apple is not suffering from losing to Samsung or the opposite, right?
Hold on, but
None of them would like
okay.
go up.
I think you're operating on the wrong premise of suffering. First of all, is a human thing. It's not an animal thing. So animals don't suffer. You could say like, oh, I heard a rat scream when I was burning it, right? The rat is suffering. The rat is in pain. That's it. Suffering is a lot more philosophical. You don't see a fucking African guy dying in a desert, being depressed, listening to Billie Eilish, right? Like, it's different, right? A teenage girl in America, she's depressed, she's suffering. It's because suffering requires more ideas to have.
But those
right?
are suffering with no purpose.
Oh no, I'm saying just suffering. The definition in general, right?
Okay.
It only exists in humans, and only a specific kind of orientation. So like that's why I made the argument of like some random dude that doesn't know anything, like just sitting in Africa, like in the middle of nowhere, right, just dying of hunger. He doesn't give a shit about it. He's not like suffering. He's in pain. He's hungry. He's starving, right? You have to be specific with the words. So like Samsung and whatever, right? You said that's competition. It's different. And then evolution is a completely different thing. Evolution doesn't have a purpose. Remember, there's an invisible hand that guides it. Not necessarily. It's literally just survival of the fittest. And by fittest doesn't mean like being stronger or anything. It's just whatever works, right? Whatever made those genes selective enough to continue.
But your example was pretty much like similar to what you just said right now, because you said that NASA did this because of the Cold War, right? Because
The
Russia,
competition.
the Soviet Union started this, so NASA, boom, do this, right?
Okay.
Like you were saying that too. So what's the difference between that?
Okay, I see
What
what
you're
you're
saying
saying.
and what I'm saying. See, like there's contradictions right there. Like you saying that no, I'm wrong, but like your example was what I'm saying. See, you see right there. Like you give the example, and I show you the easiest way, like the easier example of you talking, and you deny it. See.
So okay, so the Russian, so the Cold War, the whole race to go to the moon first.
Right.
That
It's competition.
that competition of having Russia and America is what would have created all those inventions, right? That was the premise. And I said that was not required.
Yeah, you were saying that if America didn't suffer from the laws that the Soviet Union got to the moon 1st, they would not rush in and like send someone to the moon, right? And showing what hey, America can do it too. And what's this like?
Okay.
What is the big
So what?
different thing?
So what I said was that
suffer
the inventions that they created would have been created if they gotten the funding for it in the first place. Like if the scientists, regardless, would have made them. I'm not saying that because of the Cold War and because of the okay, I see what you're saying, yeah. I equated suffering with that.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, you're right.
Okay. No.
Nothing. So to continue to the
So
thing.
go back to like self-fulfilled purpose.
No, go back to the last thing I said was about your Samsung thing. What were you
Right.
saying there?
Okay.
Well,
so,
do you agree with what I said about how competition is the same thing
yeah.
as suffering?
So self-fulfilled purpose, like, okay, if you're not suffering from losing, like a game, or like you try to flirt a girl, right? Let's say, for example, like easiest, right? Like you're a man, you flirt a girl, and you lost a competition with another guy, right? You suffer from that loss, and you're trying to like memorize when you did it wrong, and you're gonna do better when you put it next year. So that suffer for a purpose, like suffering from losing, isn't good enough.
Well, yeah, because it was true in that context, like the
Right.
time, right? But still, you have to when you have to think when you think about the problems in general. Remember how I told you that problems are inevitable, and you have to be ready to mitigate errors, and that's how what philosophy does. Philosophy helps you with mitigating the errors. So having better ideas prevents you from getting into situations where you would suffer. Remember how I told you that more knowledge leads to less suffering, right? Like if we knew more, then less suffering would happen. If you knew everything about how women work in flirting, and you first talked to a girl, then you would probably get it right, and then you wouldn't suffer.
Okay.
So regardless, more knowledge is always just good. I feel like the virtue of suffering to get knowledge is not the virtue. I think the virtue of getting the knowledge to prevent the suffering is the what's called the ideal. I think it's like in like a step, right? Like so, like the priority should be knowledge. The accidental knowledge you get from experience or suffering, right? I think is less.
Okay.
It's and this is difficult because a guy can come up to you and say like, oh, I've seen it all, right? And then he can tell you like, oh, don't do this, Dante, and don't do this. Like when you get to this part of your business, don't do this. Like I suffered through it. Like don't make no mistakes. And then you listen to that and you think, oh, maybe I need to suffer too, because he did. But in the end, he's giving you the knowledge. Like he did the work for you. It's kind of like how people who built like the speaker here, right? They didn't have to learn about the way electromagnetism worked. They just knew magnets worked and how they work. That's it. So that way they could just focus on improving the sound quality with semiconductors and the resistors inside the amplifiers and stuff like that, right? They already knew that knowledge. They're standing on the shoulders of giants, right? And if you had to do that every single time, there would be no progress. That's my argument for why suffering for a purpose isn't like good.
It's not ideal, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
It can happen and it can be true in that context, like I said with the watch and the Constitution.
So that's what we can learn from history and what happened in the past.
Because certain things are true in contexts. And when I say that, I know you understand what I'm saying, but for the people who are listening, when I say something is true in the context, I'm not saying it for pro-relativism. You know relativism, right? When you say like some things are true depending on the context. Like how people say, this is rude, in another culture, but it's fine here, right? Those things are not like are truths specifically for social situations. Like it's rude to point in Japan, right? You point like this or like this, right? That's true in that context. Let's say if you want to make a friend in Japan, right? And you want to show him what the thing is, you point the way they do because that was true in the context of that situation to get the social dynamics right. You don't want to mess up the friendship, so you do the true cultural thing. That doesn't mean that this is the right, true way humans should point. Does that make sense?
Okay.
It's just ideally, you would never always go to person and to talk like a fucking robot, like logical robot, right? There's always contexts that are true. That doesn't mean that I believe in relativism. My argument is not for relativism, and it's not for justificationism. It's for fallibility. The philosophy of Karl Popper, right? Remember I told you that we are fallible and make mistakes. We're trying to find the best, the one true truth. The only way we can do that is by keep getting more knowledge.
Knowledge, avoiding suffering.
So the opposite is a lot of objectivists would say, is that they would say there is a truth, which I do too. Like we both think that, right? But the difference is the manner in which they do it. They do it through induction, and I'm doing it differently. Does that make sense? Because what they think is Ayn Rand's epistemology is more like a justificationism, like saying that there is a truth, which is like there's nothing wrong with that, right? But the acquisition of that knowledge is different, because induction is wrong logically. It's like it doesn't work. Even Ayn Rand wrote in the Introduction to Objective Epistemology, she even said that there's something wrong with it, right? But she died before she could get to it. But I can never say what she would conclude to. Who knows? But all I know is that the epistemology with Karl Popper and Ayn Rand's everything else is the best. Because I know what I'm saying right here, a lot of objectivists would disagree with. But it is better. And I would definitely like an argument, because every time I try to bring this up with any objectivist I talk to, they never want to fucking talk about it. They just think, oh, who's Karl Popper? Oh, he's a Marxist. He's a socialist. He can't be right about anything else.